people like me and my experiences have been really not overlooked, but they've been just too encompassing for them, or too threatening, I think. It was 2 decades ago anyway.
A New Zealand businessman left for a routine 3-hour drive and vanished for 10 days. When he came back, his car electronics had been physically reversed. Crystals from the wrong continent were sitting in his seats. And governments from 4 countries began hunting him.
There must be a time very, very soon when you can talk about this stuff and people will look at you with an understanding in their eyes. That's the thing about a true story. You can't fabricate the detail. They never take the time to examine the detail.
They threatened his family, constructed a criminal sting, and sent him to prison. He still refused to be quiet. The suppression campaign they launched against him might be the most convincing part of the entire story. The man who left and never arrived. Here is something that almost no one covering this story mentions. As recently as the last couple of years, Alec Newald appeared on multiple podcasts to tell his story again. The same story he has been telling since the late 90s. The same beings, the same planet, the same specific architectural details, the same government threats, consistent across 35 years of interviews, books, conferences, and public appearances on multiple continents. Most fabricated stories crack under that kind of pressure. They shift and grow and quietly contradict themselves over time. Newald's has not. In 1997, he published Coevolution, the true story of a man taken for 10 days to an extraterrestrial civilization through Nexus Publishing in Australia. By 1999, Adventures Unlimited Press released a United States edition. A revised second edition appeared in 2011 with 36 pages of additional material not in the original, including previously unreleased details about his interrogations. And a third edition is now being prepared, containing classified interrogation documents he claims to have finally recovered. 35 years after the event, new layers are still surfacing. Now, here is the angle almost nobody discusses. The question everyone asks about this case is whether Newald was really taken by aliens. But there is a far more disturbing question buried underneath that one. If nothing happened, if this was all a misremembered gap or an elaborate story, then why did agencies from New Zealand, Britain, South Africa, and apparently the United States spend 8 years actively pursuing a car mechanic from a small city? Why did agents find him after he relocated, without telling anyone his new address? Why did men come to his house, beat him in front of his family while one stood over the phone so nobody could call the police? Why did someone construct a stolen vehicle sting operation that resulted in his bankruptcy and imprisonment? Suppression campaigns do not exist without something worth suppressing. That is the frame for everything that follows. Alec Newald was not the kind of man who believed in UFOs. He was a businessman and car dealer who had recently left the trade after the 1987 New Zealand stock market crash wiped out much of the industry. His 16-year marriage had just ended, which meant that, for the first time in his adult life, he was completely alone, with no one expecting him at any specific hour. He set out heading northwest on State Highway 5, the road that climbs through the Mamaku Range, a stretch of mountains known for sudden heavy fog, sharp bends through dense bush, and very little traffic in the early morning hours. He remembers the drive beginning. He remembers the familiar landscape. Then his memory cuts off completely. Not gradually. It stops like a switch, mid-thought, mid-road, mid-breath. His next conscious memory is pulling into Auckland, convinced that only 3 hours had passed. His dashboard clock had stopped. His wristwatch had stopped. Both at exactly the same moment, 10 in the morning. He walked into the house, believing everything was normal. The faces that looked back at him told him it was not. 10 days had passed. All his money was still in his wallet, except a small amount spent on fuel. No evidence he had been anywhere, but physical evidence waited in his car. 2 iron pyrite crystals were sitting on his seat, identified by a geologist as a variety found only in South Africa or South America, not native anywhere in New Zealand. And something more strange than the crystals. The electronic systems inside his vehicle had been physically reversed. The printed circuit board and the fuel injector system were mirror images of what they should be. Not damaged, not randomly malfunctioning. Reversed, as though the car had been taken apart and reassembled the wrong way around. He eventually sold it because it never worked properly again. Confabulated memories do not reverse circuit boards. False memories do not deposit foreign geology onto car seats. Something physical happened to that vehicle during the same 10 days that happened to Alec Newald. The wreckage of a return. The days after he returned were not peaceful. The headaches came first, severe and unrelenting, not responding to anything ordinary. Then came exhaustion that went deeper than physical tiredness, the kind that seems to originate from somewhere inside the body, rather than from muscle or effort. He began confusing right and left, making wrong turns on roads he had driven hundreds of times, mishandling ordinary objects like knives and forks, as though his spatial wiring had been disrupted at a neurological level. His consciousness felt fractured, as though reality was not quite connecting together the way it always had. Within a few days of his return, 2 men knocked on his door, identifying themselves as scientists from the Department of Scientific and Industrial Research, the DSIR. They asked very specific and unusual questions about whether his car had been involved in an accident involving high-voltage electric fields. They were not there about his well-being. They were there about the car's electronics. Newald later confirmed these men were not DSIR personnel at all. The department had no record of sending anyone to his address. He relocated without sharing his new address with anyone. They found him again within weeks. Then the memories began coming. Here is a detail that separates his case from most others in the literature. They did not arrive through hypnotic regression. Most prominent abduction accounts emerged through therapist-guided regression sessions, a method extensively criticized because the therapist's framing and expectations can directly shape what the subject ends up recalling. Newald's memories surfaced entirely on their own through persistent dreams he initially dismissed as stress reactions, but they were too specific and consistent to dismiss for long. He began writing them down each morning. The fragments connected precisely. Within 1 to 2 years, he had documented one of the most detailed sustained contact accounts in the record. The beings, the suit, and the transfer. The beings Newald encountered are described with a consistency across every retelling that researchers in this field find genuinely unusual. They were approximately 5 feet tall at the tallest, slightly built, with smooth, rounded heads, eyes he described specifically as cat-like, white or blue-gray skin with a slight sheen, and very small mouths that rarely moved because they did not communicate through sound. He called them the Blues across interviews because of the distinctly blue tinge to their skin. Their eyes were placed lower on the face than human eyes, well-spaced, and carrying what he described as an unusual depth of perception, as though they were seeing considerably more than human eyes could register. The first being he formally met was designated his guardian for the duration of the stay. From the book, he was slightly built with a roundish head and unusual squinty eyes placed lower on the face than human eyes, with a very small mouth and no visible ears or nose to speak of. The guardian stood approximately 4 feet tall. His presence was overwhelming in a way Newald struggled to articulate. Not hypnotic, almost the opposite. as though the being's energy was being actively projected outward and physically absorbed by Newald's body. The Guardian's first words were that the suit Newald had been given would make it possible for them to understand each other in both directions. The suit is one of the most specific and unusual elements in the entire account. It was not clothing in any conventional sense. It was a biological and technological hybrid that melded with Newald's own skin, giving him a blue-gray appearance similar to the beings around him. He was guided into what he described as a glass cabinet and does not recall the process of the suit being applied. He only remembers being inside the cabinet and then outside it wearing something that felt like an extension of himself rather than something placed on top of him. The suit amplified telepathic communication so that the being's thoughts arrived fully formed in his mind with complete clarity. It supplied all nutrition and eliminated every biological need, including sleep. In the coast-to-coast interview, he described it as an artificial skin with a communication device fitted to it that enabled him to read their thoughts from that point forward. His primary companion throughout the 10 days was a being he named Xena. She was approximately 5 feet tall, with violet blue eyes that the NZ Geographic Independent feature described as alluring. Newald perceived her as feminine from their first meeting and used female pronouns consistently across every account over 3 decades. She was formally designated Xena 5 within the being's social structure, selected for a modified reproductive process specifically designed to reintroduce emotional capacity to a species that had almost entirely lost it hundreds of thousands of years earlier. Here is the detail that stopped researchers when the book first appeared. In the coast-to-coast interview, Newald revealed quietly that Xena had identified herself as related to him through her mother, described as a pure human woman connected ancestrally to his own lineage, making Xena, in biological terms, a hybrid being who shared his bloodline. He declined to elaborate, saying there were people involved he did not want to hurt or offend. He has never expanded on this in any subsequent interview. The beings communicated through what he described as a color resonance harmonic, not words, full thoughts arriving already formed, carrying emotional texture and contextual meaning, blended with colors and tonal qualities that conveyed layers human language cannot replicate. Xena could read his thoughts and frequently answered questions he had not yet asked aloud. The planet's total population was approximately 15 million, governed by 9 elected high councilors. A city at the edge of the possible. The planet was called Haven, roughly the size of Mars, with a surface entirely inhospitable without sophisticated protective gear. The sky was black both day and night, with no visible stars, replaced by a pulsing grid or force field woven through the atmosphere. The sun was reddish and so saturated with radiation that leaving a building without a full reflective suit was dangerous. Xena explained the situation directly. Their sun was slowly dying, they were being roasted with radiation, and their atmosphere was gradually failing. The beings had already migrated once from their original world, described as the 5th planet from the Sun, the position now occupied by the asteroid belt. After its destruction, they moved to Mars, then Earth, then Haven. They were already searching for the next migration. The surface was arid and almost entirely without life. The ground had a texture like cork, porous and slightly yielding underfoot. No sound anywhere outside. No animals, no ecosystem, and no visible life of any kind extending to the horizon in every direction. The city stretched along the coastline in both directions beyond what Newald could see. Buildings were circular and tube-like, made of material that appeared to be tinted semi-transparent glass, arranged in a spiral pattern with the tallest structures at the center. Each building was capped with a spiral tower or antenna arrangement and topped with what he described as a large light bulb structure that was not decorative but functional, likely an energy collection or transmission node. Interiors were predominantly pearl white with silver-gray undertones, and from deeper inside the structures came all the colors of the spectrum shifting slowly and quietly, similar to looking into a mother-of-pearl shell from the inside. Then Newald said something no interviewer was prepared for. The buildings were alive, not metaphorically, biologically sentient. From the book, almost everything he saw or touched on Haven was alive, including the machinery and the buildings themselves. These structures had a personality, and their relationship with the inhabitants was closer to that of a family pet back on Earth. When the beings returned to their dwelling after time away, they greeted it as another living entity, a friend, a loved one. Buildings responded to their occupants with visible flushes of color. Windows opened out of solid walls on request. Interior lighting shifted with whoever was inside. When a person was excited, the room colors danced through the full spectrum. When someone settled into meditation, the light dropped and only the softest tones remained. Transportation within the city used vehicles that were pyramidal in shape, hovering a few inches above the ground with no wheels, guided by a combination of mental intention and magnetic repulsion. A being offering Newald manual control via a slider said he should guide while they provided the power, and added that doing it by pure thought alone was not something Newald was quite up to yet. The spacecraft were living crystal entities that could change shape on command, and were controlled entirely through the consciousness of their pilots, a process the beings described as melding. The initial craft that transported Newald to Haven was pyramidal in shape, and the beings confirmed this was not incidental, but required specifically for dimensional travel. The beings consumed a liquid solution he described as resembling monatomic gold. His suit provided his nutrition directly throughout the entire visit. He never needed to eat, drink, or sleep for the full 10 days. Everything so far is extraordinary. Then comes the part that governments apparently found dangerous enough to imprison a man over. The truth they never wanted us to remember. Xena conducted her teaching sessions with Newald inside the archive pyramid, the one building on Haven that contained the most plant life, because virtually nothing grew on the surface anymore. What she told him about humanity was not presented as mythology or spiritual metaphor. It was presented as documented history from a civilization that had been observing Earth for longer than human civilization had existed. Her first claim was the most fundamental. Modern Homo sapiens was not a product of natural evolution alone. Human beings were designed. The final pieces of the genetic framework were assembled approximately 70,000 years ago by beings with the technological capacity to engineer consciousness itself. The human body was described as the first biological form ever constructed to act as a receiver and container so that a bodiless entity could inhabit it and experience physical reality through it. The entity Xena was referring to was what humans call the soul. The body was built specifically to house it. She told him that more than one extraterrestrial race had been involved in human genetic engineering, making humanity a universal mixing pot of design and intent. Specific bloodlines were created as a ruling class, seeded to serve as rulers who would oversee a human slave labor race. Newald connected this in interviews to the Anunnaki research of Zecharia Sitchin, noting that the Anunnaki appeared to be an advanced race of genetic gene splicers who could well be the ancient remnants of the group he ran across during his 10 days. Then comes the part governments apparently wanted buried. Xena told him directly, There was a time upon Earth when a force came down and claimed the planet and all upon it as its own. That force is still among humanity and is now a part of all people on Earth. After this force won the planet, it realized it would face continuous resistance because humanity at that time was well on its way to enlightenment, with a strong spiritual base, and was almost as powerful as the force itself. It had to trick humanity in order to master it, and while people were down, it altered their very structure, their DNA. It crippled and stunted humanity and set it back many thousands of years. It made people into what they are today, which is only a portion of the greatness they could be. And if that force has its way, recovery will never happen. The force had no visible physical form. It was described as a non-physical entity that sustained itself on fear, specifically on the amplification of the fear of death. Xena told him the easiest way to defeat it is to remove fear from human societies, which would in effect starve it of what it feeds on. In the coast-to-coast interview, Newald connected this directly to biology. There are people suggesting that the human race has 12 strands of DNA when fully active, and he believed only 2 are currently active, that something happened to detune humanity at a critical point in its history. The ENCODE project completed in 2012 found that up to 80% of human DNA shows measurable biochemical activity, directly challenging the old consensus that most of the genome was meaningless. The science is not confirming alien intervention, but it is confirming that large portions of the genome previously dismissed as inactive are not inactive at all. Xena told him the ancient pyramid structures around Earth were not tombs or religious monuments, but ancient legacies left behind by the elders specifically to help humanity awaken when the time became right. She predicted environmental disruptions of increasing intensity appearing randomly across the globe rather than confined to traditional regions, and specifically named Japan and the Gulf of Mexico as areas of concern. She described battles that would take place at sea, underwater, and in the skies above. And she gave Newald his purpose directly, telling him he was part of a very special event that would happen, as were many others, and that he would find them and they would find him. She told him something that makes the book's title make complete sense. Both civilizations can grow. Both need to change. Humanity will become more like them while they need to become more like humanity. The coevolution is not a metaphor. It is a specific biological and spiritual proposal from a species that has lost its emotional capacity and is attempting to recover it partly through select human bloodlines, including, apparently, the bloodline of Alec Newald himself. Newald returned to Auckland carrying memories no government had authorized him to share. Within days, the suppression was already operating. The machine that comes for those who remember. The fake DSIR scientists were the opening move. Finding him after he relocated without telling anyone his new address was the second. Then came direct visits from men who identified themselves as intelligence representatives without producing verifiable credentials of any kind. Their message was consistent across every contact. Cooperate. Hand over everything you remember about the beings and their technology. Agree to permanent public silence, and all problems disappear. Newald refused every time. The agencies he identified across his book and interviews included New Zealand Police, the Security Intelligence Service, British intelligence, who made what he described as none too friendly visits, South African intelligence, and implied American involvement. His summary from the coast-to-coast interview: some covert agency had got hold of what happened to him, and they virtually never let him rest for 8 years. Physical intimidation came before the legal trap. Men came to his house and beat him outside in front of his family, while one stood over the telephone so nobody could call the police. Then came Jeff Wright. Wright approached Newald at a well-known car auction in Auckland, introduced himself as having access to cheap imported Japanese vehicles, and over 8 to 9 months supplied Newald with a series of cars. Newald was in the car trade. This was a completely plausible business relationship. The paperwork appeared entirely legitimate. 6 cars in total changed hands between them. Then the police arrived. Every vehicle was stolen. The paperwork was fraudulent from the beginning. And Jeff Wright had vanished completely, leaving behind no business records, no personal records, and no trace of his existence anywhere that could be found. Newald was charged with receiving stolen property. The legal process that followed was designed not to produce a quick verdict, but to generate maximum pressure over maximum time. Over 2 years of recurring court appearances, more than 20 in total, with prosecutors repeatedly claiming they were not ready to proceed. The district court judge eventually threatened to throw the entire case out due to prosecutorial delay. Newald was made bankrupt during this period. All his assets were seized. He was assigned an ineffective court-appointed lawyer, while his accusers continued stalling the process and continuing to offer the same private deal. Cooperate and everything disappears. He refused every time. The trial itself lasted a full week in the main Auckland District Courthouse. 4 friends came forward and testified in his defense. He was convicted. He served approximately 6 months, beginning in mid-1993, at South Camp Rangipo, a minimum security facility in the central North Island near Taupo. At Rangipo, agents made one final visit and brought symbols from his abduction experience, apparently expecting him to react in a way that revealed the depth of what he remembered. One of the interrogators spoke with a distinct South African accent, which Newald connected later to a 1989 incident in South Africa where a craft was allegedly shot down, suggesting the South African intelligence interest was not random, but part of a wider pattern. He refused again. He was released, broke, and homeless. He stated that he had left his family and never went back out of fear of involving them in some form of direct threat. His conclusion: he was a political prisoner in New Zealand for 6 months because he refused to cooperate. After his release, he made one decision. The only protection available was complete public exposure. If the information was already in print and circulating in the public record, silencing him afterward served no purpose. Everything went into the book. He published it. And despite the trial lasting a full week in Auckland's main courthouse, not one newspaper reported on it. Not a single line appeared in the local press. There is a version of the Alec Newald story that skeptics tell, and it is coherent and well supported. There is a version believers tell, and it is also coherent and well supported. The genuinely unsettling thing about this case is that both versions hold up simultaneously and neither one fully defeats the other. What he brought back, and what it means. The skeptical case is strong. Newald experienced the most extreme personal stress of his adult life immediately before the event. His 16-year marriage had just collapsed. He was alone for the first time, on a mountain road known for disorienting heavy fog, with nobody expecting him at a specific destination. These are precise conditions for a dissociative fugue state, a documented medical phenomenon in which a person loses awareness and travels without conscious memory for periods ranging from hours to weeks. A Harvard study in 2002 by Susan Clancy and Richard McNally found that people who report recovered alien abduction memories score significantly higher on tests measuring susceptibility to false memory formation while scoring entirely normally on tests of accurate recall. They are not lying. They believe completely. But their brains demonstrably accept constructed memories as real more readily than others. The thematic content of his revelations also maps closely onto material that was widely available before his experience. The genetic engineering theory had been published in book form 13 years earlier. The ancient pyramid legacy concept was established in alternative research literature throughout the entire decade before his disappearance. The name Xena entered Newald's public narrative around the same period that New Zealand billboards were advertising Xena, warrior princess. The timing is uncomfortable, and more than one researcher has noted it. But then, the believer case arrives with its own considerable weight. No stress-induced fugue state reverses the electronics inside a car. No psychological episode deposits iron pyrite crystals of a geological origin exclusive to other continents onto a car seat. No personal fantasy requires governments from 4 different countries to spend 8 years conducting active surveillance, making direct physical threats, constructing a criminal sting, and incarcerating a previously unknown man. The cost Newald absorbed is staggering. Bankruptcy, prison, permanent family separation, social ostracism, 8 years of surveillance. He could have ended all of it at any point by simply cooperating. He never did. Not once. The memories themselves arrived without hypnotic regression, which removes the primary contamination mechanism skeptics use to explain recovered abduction accounts. His account assembled itself through natural dreams documented in writing over time, a process with substantially fewer opportunities for external shaping or suggestion. Now consider the question this entire story has always been circling. Institutions do not spend 8 years, multiple agencies, enormous resources, physical threats, constructed criminal charges, and an actual prison sentence trying to silence someone who is simply confused or delusional. Confused and delusional people get ignored. The rational response to a harmless eccentric is to let them publish their book and disappear into the noise of the alternative research world, which is exactly what would have happened to Newald if nobody had touched him first. The irrational response, the one that actually happened, is the response you see when someone is saying something true. Alec Newald continues to stand by every detail of his account. The 10 days that disappeared from his life remain the most unresolved puzzle in New Zealand's history of unexplained events. No radar data from that region, no independent witnesses to anything on that road, no medical records from the missing period, nothing that closes the case definitively in either direction. Only the man himself, still consistent after all these years, still insisting that what was shown to him was not shown by accident, and that what was done to him afterward by the people who wanted it buried is the clearest proof that what they buried was real. He did not ask to be chosen. He did not seek this out. He was just a man on a familiar road on an ordinary morning. And yet, here we are, 35 years later, still unable to close the file. That, more than anything else, is what makes this story impossible to walk away from. Alec Newald paid a price almost no one would willingly absorb just to keep talking, and he has never stopped. Drop your thoughts in the comments and tell us what you think actually happened during those 10 days.